Today is going to be Objective 27. We are going to find trigonometric functions using half-angle formulas, okay? So, I'm trying to think right now. If I asked for the sine of 15 degrees, now there are multiple ways to do this. Like, we found the sine of 15 degrees a couple days ago doing what? What did we do to get 15? 15 is not on our unit circle. We added and subtracted. So that's one way to find the sine of 15 degrees. Do you understand? But if 15 is the half angle, double 15, what would you have? 30. Does that make sense? And so then you could use this formula using the 30 to find 15. Does that make sense? You could use the half angle formula to find 15. And so you could use the 30. Okay, I'm not sure if that makes sense yet or not, but here are your formulas. So the sine of u divided by 2, okay, so if I want the sine of 15, it's not 15 divided by 2. 15 is not the u. What divided by 2 would be 15? 30. So it would be the sine of 30. So u would become 30. So when you plugged it in, like to this formula, it would be plus or minus the square root of 1 minus the cosine of 30 divided by 2, okay? And that's how we would figure that out. How do you know if it's going to be a plus or a minus? It depends on what quadrant you're in. So before I click to the first one, I want you to think about this, okay? Because it's going to be dependent on your quadrants. So if I'm in the first quadrant, okay, let's say u is between 0 and 90, okay? If I half it, where will I be? Where will my half angle be? Like, pick a number in the first quadrant. 45. Okay, so if I'm 45 degrees, but I don't want the sine of 45 degrees, I want the sine of half of that. Do you understand? So what would be half of 45 degrees be? 22.5, right? 22.5. So where's our half angle? Half of that is I'm still in quadrant 1, meaning if I find the sine, the cosine, or the tangent of that half angle, half of 45, it'll still be positive because I'll still be in quadrant 1, okay? What if I'm in quadrant 2? Give me an angle that would be in quadrant 2. One what? 170? Is that okay? 170. Okay. Well, that's what u is 170, but I want to find half of that angle. So what's half of 170? 85. So where's my half angle? In which quadrant? Quadrant 1. So if my starting angle is in quadrant 2, my half angle, the half of that, will end up in quadrant 1, meaning all my signs will be positive. Okay, let's go to quadrant 3. Give me an easy angle in quadrant 3. 240. I heard 240. Okay, that's an easy one. All right, so if I half that angle, so I'm using 240 for like everything in here, and sines and everything. Does that make sense? I'm using 240 for everything in here. But when I get to the end and I have to decide, you're going to have to decide, do you take the plus or the minus? Where's half of 240? 120. So you would end up in quadrant 2 in 120. And so we know all students take calculus. So if I'm finding the sine, what would I take? The positive. If I find the cosine, I would take negative. If I'm finding the tangent, it should work out. It should work itself out, okay? Really, with the sine and the cosine, that's where you have to make that decision, okay? So do you understand? You're going to be using the double angle, I guess you would say, to find your final answer is going to be the half angle, and that's what your determination is, okay? If you're in quadrant 4, give me an easy angle in quadrant 4. 300. Okay? So that's what I'm using. I'm going to use everything based on 300, but my answer is going to be the half angle of that. What's half of 300? 150. So where will I end? I will end in quadrant 2, meaning that my sine will end up being, and my cosine will end up being negative. Does that make sense? Kind of what that's the tough part, is you have to determine, is it positive, is it negative, based on the half of it, okay? I'm not sure. We'll spend some time reviewing beforehand. I promise. It won't be like, you know, we'll at least take a day. It won't be Monday, I can tell you that. And we're gonna practice this tomorrow. Okay. So I promise it won't be Monday. So anyway, I'll find out when our test is and how much more we're learning before, but we will definitely do some review prior to testing. Okay. All right. So I want to know the exact value of 22.5. Okay. So that is my half angle. So first of all, if we go to our sine formula, the sine of u over 2 is equal to what? Plus or minus the square root of 1 minus cosine u over 2. Okay. So you're not going to plug in 22 and a half. That's not u. Okay? U is going to be the double of what you're looking for. Does that make sense? Because 22 and a half is the half angle. Okay? So you tell me what's u? 45. So we are going to be doing everything based off of 45. So the sine of 45 divided by 2, that's what we're looking for, and that would be 22 and a half. Okay? Is plus or minus the square root of 1 minus, what's the cosine of 45? All right? Square root of 2 over 2, all divided by 2. Okay? Let's go ahead. I'm debating on if I want to simplify this or not. Yeah, let's go ahead and simplify what's under the radical. Okay? Meaning, let's go ahead and multiply by a common denominator underneath here. So what's our common denominator? 2. Okay, so plus or minus the square root of, so when I multiply this, I get 2 minus square root of 2 divided by 4. Very good. When you multiply that, that would be 4. Okay, and I'm going to let you leave, right now you don't know how to, we're going to leave the square root under the square root. The only thing I will tell you is we're not going to leave a complex fraction under a square root, meaning I'm not going to leave a fraction within another fraction, so you do need to get rid of the complex part of the fraction. It is okay to leave just a simple fraction, just one fraction, okay, and we're just going to leave that as our answer. My question is, we've got to decide, is it positive or is it negative? So where is our half angle? We're searching for 22.5. What quadrant? Quadrant 1. So it is the positive. Okay. Let me show you, since we have degrees today, let me show you, so this, your answer, the sine of 22.5 is equal to positive of this. Okay. Let me show you how you can check your answer. Okay. As long as your calculator is in degree mode, because we're putting in degrees. Everybody with me so far? I want you to put in the sine of 22.5 degrees and tell me what you get. The sine of 22.5 degrees. It's going to be a decimal. Sine of 22.5, you get what? 0.3826834324. Got it? Are you in degree mode? Yeah, so make sure you're in, go to your mode, make sure you're in degrees because you're putting in 22.5 degrees. Okay? Now I want you to put in the square root, and you're going to have to put this part in, you're going to have to put this part in parentheses. So I want you to put in the square root of, and so you'll have to 2 minus the square root of 2 divided by 4. And tell me what you get. All right, let's go to the next one. All right, so I want to find the exact value of the tangent of 165. So you could put in your calculator the tangent of 165. Okay, that's not really what I'm looking for. Does that make sense? That's not really what I'm looking for, but I want to figure out what it is in terms of radical form. Okay, so let's first write down our formula. Now, if you go back to the tangent, you have a choice, and it really doesn't matter to me. I don't know what y'all like better. Which one do you like better? You like this one? Okay, that's fine. So they want to use this one right here. The sine of u divided by 1 plus the cosine of u. Okay, so that's the one we're going to use. Either one should work. So this is the tangent of u over 2, and it's going to be the sine of u over 1 plus the cosine of u. Now, you've got to decide what tangent of 165, that's the half angle that I'm looking for. So what does that make u? What does that make you? 330. How'd you get 330? You just take 165 and times it by 2. You double it. Does that make sense? The angle you use in the formula is the double, or multiplied by 2, of the half angle you're looking for. Okay? So we're going to use the tangent of 330 divided by 2. Okay? So if I use my unit circle and we go to 330, what's the sine of 330? Negative 1/2 divided by 1 plus the cosine of 330, which is square root of 3 over 2. Now we can't leave it just like this because it's a complex fraction. It's a fraction within a fraction, so you got to get rid of that part. So we're going to times everything by 2, and so that will be negative 1 over 2 plus square root of 3. Now, you technically can't leave that either. Why can't you leave that part? Because there's a radical in the denominator, so what do you have to do? You have to rationalize it by multiplying by the conjugate. Don't you wish somebody would have told you in Algebra 2 when you multiplied by the conjugate that you were going to use this a lot in trig? I wonder if anybody ever said that. Negative 1 times 2 is negative 2. Negative 1 times negative square root of 3. Positive square root of 3. Okay, then 2 times 2, 4. The outer and the inner do what? They cancel. And then square root of 3 times negative square root of 3 is minus 3. And 4 minus 3 is equal to 1. So what's your answer? Negative 2 plus the square root of 3. So here's what I'd like for you to do. I want you to put in the tangent of 165, because that's what you're looking for. Then I want you to put in negative 2 plus the square root of 3 and see if you come up with the same answer. I always have this fear that, like, what if we made a mistake? Because that happens sometimes in higher level maths. So I'm like, please work, please work, please work. Okay, so when I'm actually saying I want this value, okay, does that make sense? First of all, 165 is not on your unit circle, okay? Like if this were test A, and I wanted to find, and I said, find, you know, and there's other ways to find the tangent of 165. What could you add or subtract to get 165? I think you could do like 210 and minus 45, or you could do, right, 135 plus 30. So you could do the addition and subtraction formulas if you like those better. Do you understand? There are other ways to do this. But I'm sitting here thinking, okay, I've either got to make like a combination and add them and subtract them to get this, or you could say, could I double this? This is what we're looking at today. Could you double this? Could you double 165? Would that be on your unit circle? Like if you can't double it and it's not on, like if I doubled, I'm trying to think of something. If I doubled 20, do you understand? If I doubled 20, if I wanted to know the sine of 20 degrees, you couldn't use this, you couldn't use the half formula because when you double 20, you get 40, and 40 is not going to help you. Does that make sense? It's got to be a number that's on the unit circle. So when I look at this, I can say, oh, I can double that and make 330, and then this becomes the half angle. That's half of 330. And that's why I would use the half angle formula to figure this out. The reason why I know to use half angles today is because we're learning half angles. We're doing this with half angles. Does that make sense, though? So I do want you to understand there are ways on the test, but if I ask for this on the test, you're going to have to like go back to your addition and subtraction, and you're going to have to say, okay, can I add something or subtract something to get that? So then you use your addition and subtraction formulas. Or you say, can I double it? Then you could use the half angle because that's half of the double. Does that make sense? So you could figure that out. Oh, this right here, this one, it works out. The tangent will work the sine out for you. The only one that you have to decide whether to take the plus or the minus is right here on the sine and the cosine. The sine and the cosine, you're going to have to determine whether to take the positive square root or whether to take the negative square root, determined based on the quadrant. This one will work it'll work itself out for you. Kind of like our double angles. Our double angles worked itself out for us. Does that make sense? We talked about what the signs should be or could be, but the formula's worked itself out for us. All right. So what do you think you should do with this one? I would change that to degrees first. Okay, so here's what I'm going to let you do. I'm going to give you a second because it's just the same formula. I want you to change that to degrees and see if you can plug into the formula and see how far you get with it. Okay? So, all right, let's look. First of all, when we times by 180 over pi, we get that this angle is what? 67.5 degrees. Any questions on that? Okay. So, come test day, you only have to remember, like, and you don't even have to remember these different formulas, but to figure out what formula you're going to use, you got to say, can you add something to make off the unit circle to make 67.5? Can you subtract something to make 67.5? Or could you double 67.5, meaning 67.5 would be the half angle? Does that make sense? And we figured you can't add or subtract. You would not be able to do this problem with the addition or subtraction formulas. Okay? You would have to double 67.5 and you get 135. So we're going to use 135 over 2 to find 67.5. Okay? So 135 is going to be what I use in my formula. I'm using the double of what I'm looking for. Okay? That's what I use in my formula. So my formula is plus or minus, help me out. 1 plus the cosine of x over 2. All right, thank you very much. So plus or minus the square root of 1 plus the cosine of 135. Okay, cosine of 135. So if you go to 135 and you look at your x coordinate, it would be what? Negative square root of 2 over 2, all divided by 2. Okay, now you cannot just leave it like that because we do not leave a fraction within a fraction. So you've got to keep rolling a little bit. Okay, so I'm basically going to take my inside and I'm going to multiply it by a common denominator by 2. And so this will be plus or minus the square root of 2, and that'll just be minus square root of 2, all divided by 4. Okay, and you can just leave it like that, except for you've got to determine plus or minus. So let's take a look. All students take calculus. I know that we used 135, which is quadrant 2, meaning that the cosine would be what? Negative, but that's not what I'm searching for. Even though I use whatever you use in the formula, you with me so far? That's not what you're looking for. You're looking for half of that angle. Half of that angle is 67.5. And that is in quadrant 1, meaning we should take the positive. Okay? And you should be able to check yourself, guys. You should be able to put in the cosine of 67.5, get your decimal, and then you should be able to put in the square root of 2 minus the square root of 2, all divided by 4. It should work. Okay? It should give you the same crazy decimal. Yes? Are y'all having to put parentheses around the top? Yeah, I would. I definitely would. So if you're using your calculator, I definitely would put that around. Okay? All right. So let's do one more. Like this, and then I got to switch gears and show you one more thing. Okay, there are 5 examples. What's the degree of pi over 12? 15 degrees, right? All right, so we're searching for 15 degrees. So, you know what I would love? Just to see, because it should work, right? I would love for you to find it using this formula. And then what could you subtract to get 15? 45 and 30. This would be a good review. Y'all said we've done too much. So go back and use your subtraction formula and see if you can't get the same answer. Does that make sense? And it may look a little different. Why might it look a little different? Like the formula, because of the formula is slightly different. Does that make sense? Remember a ways back, like when we were doing it in 2 different, the answers were slightly off just because you just did it a different way, but still it's in the general ballpark. So I want you to do this 2 different ways. I want you to do it using the half angle by doubling this. Use your half angle formula, and then I want you to go back and do your subtraction formula, and let's compare and see if it works. All right, so I went back to review. This is what I get when I use the subtraction formula. We know we can subtract. This is what we did a couple days ago. When we subtract 45 and 30, we can get the sine of 15. Okay? And so by that formula, it says to multiply the sine of 45 times the cosine of 30 minus the cosine of 45 times the sine of 30. And when you work that out, I ended up with the square root of 6 minus the square root of 2 divided by 4. Okay? Then, when you use your half angle formula, it should come out. It's going to look different because it's a different formula. Okay? But when you put it in your calculator and check the 2, Like if you put in the square root of 6 minus the square root of 2, hit enter, or put it in parentheses and then divide it by 4, it should equal what we get when we put in today's formula, okay? So today's formula is the sine of, now, if 15 is my half, what angle am I actually using in the formula? 30. All right, I'm going to use 30 divided by 2, and the formula is plus or minus the square root of what? Cosine of u over 2. So plus or minus the square root of 1 minus the cosine of 30 is square root of 3 over 2. Square root of 3, let's make that a 3 over 2. I can't. Divided by 2. I'm going to get rid of that complex fraction and make that plus or minus the square root of 2 minus the square root of 3, all divided by 4. Did I do that okay? Okay. And do I take the plus or do I take the minus? So I'm going to take the positive because we are in quadrant 1. And is that based off the 30 or is that based off the 15? It's based off the, even though they're both quadrant 1, but still make sure you understand it's based on what you're looking for, the half angle, not the one you use in the formula. Okay? So I know these look totally different, but I'm hearing, I had people shaking their heads. First of all, put in the sine of 15, get your decimal. Secondly, put in square root of 6 minus square root of 2 in parentheses divided by 4. Then put in what we got down here, the square root of 2 minus the square root of 3 in parentheses divided by 4. Does it come out to all be the same decimal? Yes. And so I would accept either or on the test, to be honest with you, if I don't specify. Now, if I say, you know, use your addition and subtraction formulas, then I want your answer coming out because I'm being very specific. But if I'm not specific on how to find the angle, you could use this formula or this formula because it comes out to be the same. It just looks different. Okay? All right, let's look at one more. So I'm not giving you the degree on this. I'm telling you that the sine is 2 over 5. That means 2 over 5 what? Radians. So if you actually wanted to find the degree, what could you do to find the degree? You could do the inverse, like second sine, and put in 2/5, and it gives you like 23.578 degrees. Does that make sense? So that's kind of what I'm looking for. Any questions on that? And that actually ends up being the reference angle because we know 20. This is what Mr. Gammons was talking about the other day, Kirsten, with you. Like you could put in the sine to the -1 of 2/5, and that would give you the degrees. That would equal the degrees. But you end up with like 23.57 degrees. Well, that's in quadrant 1, but what does it tell me that I'm in? So actually, this is 23.57 degrees. That's actually the reference angle. Remember, reference angle is distance from the x-axis, so I'm 23.57 degrees. So if I wanted to actually figure out the angle, you could subtract that from 180, and it gets slightly more complicated with that. I don't know if you want me to keep going with that or not. Welcome back. We've missed you. Do y'all want me to keep going with that? No? Okay, so here's what I'll do. I mean, there are some ways for you to find that. I don't want to get too far over your head to where I like blow your minds. So here's what I'm telling you. In this case, I'm telling you that the sine of u, I'm telling you that u is 2/5. Does that make sense? So I want you to take and put that in to the sine of u over 2 and find the half of that angle. Okay? So I'm telling you that u is this. So you don't need to double 2/5 or anything like that. Does that make sense? And you wouldn't double it because it's not degrees. Okay? So I'm telling you the u is 2/5. Okay? And you're in quadrant 2. You could put that, right, you could put that in the formula. Does that make sense? Okay, so step 1, we know we're going to plug in sine and cosine into these 3 formulas. Like if we go back and look at our formulas, I know that I need the cosine, I'm going to need the cosine, I'm going to need the cosine and the sine. I don't think I need the tangent. I mean, you can find the tangent if you want to find the tangent, but I don't think you're going to need the tangent. Okay? So let's go back and let's find, before we plug in the formulas, just like we did yesterday, let's find what we're going to use. Okay? So I know that the sine is 2/5. Okay? To find the cosine, I'm going to use my Pythagorean. Sine squared x plus cosine squared x is equal to 1. So I'm going to plug in 2/5 squared plus cosine squared x is equal to 1. So that's going to make 4/25 plus cosine squared x is equal to 1. So far, so good? Holler at me if I've lost you. All right, so let's move this over and subtract 4/25. So cosine squared x is equal to 21/25, but then I need to take the square root of that. Okay, so that would be plus or minus the square root of 21/5. And I don't need to rationalize because I don't have a radical in the denominator. Okay, so is it positive or is it negative? It's negative because I'm in quadrant 2. So the cosine is going to be negative square root of 21/5. All right, so now we're just going to go to our formulas and we're going to plug in. You have to be able to, like if I give it to you like this, you got to be able, like I'm telling you what u is. I'm telling you that the sine of u, like if I used your unit circle and I said, what's the sine of 30 degrees? Then you use 1/2, right? I'm telling you that the sine of this angle, u, is equal to 2/5. So I'm telling you to plug 2/5 into the formula. Just like if I told you that the sine of 30 degrees was 1/2. You'd plug 1/2 into the formula. Do you understand that? Yes, no? Okay. Or if I said the cosine of 30 degrees, you'd plug in square root of 3/2 in the formula. But I'm telling you that the sine of u is equal to 2/5. And here, the cosine of u, so that is our u, is negative square root of 21/5. Okay? So I'm going to plug into my formula. So the sine of u/2 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 1 minus cosine of u divided by 2. Okay, so plus or minus the square root of 1 minus, what is our cosine of u? Negative square root of 21/5, all divided by 2. And that's actually going to be a double negative, so that will become a positive, okay? And we would multiply everything by 5. So this is going to be plus or minus the square root of 5 plus square root of 21 all divided by 10. All right. And the question is, so this is u, right? This is what we're plugging in to the formula. Here's where it gets tricky, and I'll try to explain it the best I can. Like a minute ago, when we plugged in 135 for u, that's what we used in the formula. But at the end, we actually took the sine of the half angle of that. And this is where I was starting in the beginning where I said you've got to know where the half angle is going to end. So if I'm starting in quadrant 2, that's where I'm starting at, and I half it, where will I end? In what quadrant? I'm not asking you to divide 2/5 by 2. I'm just asking, if I'm starting in quadrant 2, give me any angle in quadrant 2. How about 100? I like 100. 100's a nice, easy angle. If I'm starting there, but I'm actually finding the half of that angle, where will it end? You're going to end in quadrant 1. So my answer needs to be where, yes, I started in quadrant 2, but when I ended, when I take half of it, it will end in quadrant 1 when I take half of that. So would it be positive or negative? Positive. Okay? So here's what I'd like for you to do. I want you to see if you can find the cosine and the tangent now that I've done the sine for you. So you're still going to use these two right here and plug those in to the formulas and see where you end up with. I mean, you can do that, but this is, you don't need it. It's just saying this is my half. All this is going to equal the half of that. Does that make sense? And we don't necessarily know, I mean, I can go into the reference angle part and I can actually find the degree for you if you would like me to. And we can half it, and then we can put in the sign of that and see that this decimal matches that decimal. But it's easier to know that if you started in quadrant 2, in the end you're going to take the positive because that's where it's landing at, because you're taking half of it. So, our cosine formula. All right, so the cosine of u over 2, so I'm going to find the half of it, that's what I'm looking for, is plus or minus the square root of, what's our formula? 1 plus cosine u over 2. Okay, so plus or minus, this will be 1 plus negative square root of 21, so that's going to be 1 minus square root of 21 over 5, all divided by 2. Yes? So then I'm going to times by 5. So this would be plus or minus the square root of 1. Why did I do that? I did that last time. 5 minus the square root of 21, all divided by 10. Okay? And the question is, sorry, I can't get that to write 10. Would I take the plus or the minus? I just told you if you start in quadrant 2, that's what you're using. You're using the correct signs for quadrant 2 in the problem. But at the end of the problem, you got to determine half of something in quadrant 2, where do you end? You end in quadrant 1, so you would take the positive. Okay, so that'll be a positive square root of 5 minus the square root of 21, all divided by 10. Okay? The tangent formula looks like what? Tangent of u over 2 is equal to plus 1 plus cosine u. And you could use the other one if you liked the other one. So the sine is 2/5 divided by 1 minus square root of 21 over 5. That looks like really bad. And I'm going to multiply everything by 5. So that's going to end up being 2 over 1. Thank you. 5 minus the square root of 21. But then you need to rationalize it. So you need to times by 5 plus the square root of 21 in the top and the bottom. Let me erase some of this. so I'm going to distribute here. That's going to make 10 plus 2 times the square root of 21, all divided by 5 times 5 is 25. The outer and the inner do what? Cancel. And this is negative square root of 21 times positive square root of 21, which is negative 21. So 10 plus 2 times the square root of 21, all divided by 4. If you wanted to, what could you factor out from the top? You could take a 2 out of all of these, and that would be 5 plus the square root of 21, all divided by 2. Is what it should end up with. Okay, questions? All right, so